Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, I welcome you all to this very, very important, interesting webinar. As you know, the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies was established in 1992, and I'm very glad to inform you that we have with us Dr. Abhay Firodia, whose father was one of them who funded the center to start in 1992. So welcome, Dr. Abhay Firodia. I also welcome HF Marshal Pradeep Nayak, General Khandare, and of course our esteemed speakers and many other veterans who will be adding value to this particular webinar. As Shishir mentioned, we are going to be recording this. So let me start with my little bit of introduction. As you know, we've had a very tense fortnight, starting with 22nd of April when we had the Pahalgam attack. There was a resolve that we will take appropriate action. And I think today, when we discuss, first at the outset, let me mention that we owe to all the three services to have worked in unison. Also the BSF, the intelligence agencies, the scientists, DRDO, ISRO, as well as public and private sector industries in working in defense, and public at large, backed by able political leadership. There has also been cyber warfare, and those silent warriors of cyber have also played a great role. I'm sure a lot of these details will come up while the speakers will be speaking on some of the issues. We got mainly the three speakers from Air Force, the Army, and the Navy. So let me briefly introduce you the Air Marshal Choudhury, who is retired as the Commandant of National Defense College in Delhi. He is a doctorate from Osmania University. And of course, if you go into his background, a very three generations of flying Air Force pilots. He's commanded what we call as the TACD, that is where all the tactics are developed. And let me mention to you that when we look at this non-contact warfare that has happened in the last 4 days, it is beyond the visual range missiles, the tactics of which were developed under his able leadership. There is a lot that I can talk about him, but I don't want to, sort of go into the details of biodata so that we can concentrate more on the topic today. We also got General Handa, experience in the air defense. He's commanded various units and all across both the Western as well as Chinese frontier, and has a lot of experience in handling many types of weapons, including the layered defense that we are at the moment have used it. So welcome to General Handa. And then we have got Admiral Ravi Nadkarni, who, as you know, is the son of late Admiral Nadkarni, also a founder of the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies. Himself, Rear Admiral Nadkarni was in Mumbai as the Chief of Staff, Naval Operations, and as you know, this is the command which has played an important role in making sure that the Arabian Sea, especially the northern parts, has been blocked for the use by the Pakistanis. So I think we have a vast array of experience. I first request Air Marshal Choudhury to start, and thereafter keep handing over the baton to the next speaker before General Shishir Mahajan would conclude and also give a vote of thanks. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind. Over to Air Marshal Choudhury.
Good morning, gentlemen, and all the members who are attending this program this morning. And it's absolutely a privilege to be here. I thank Air Marshal Gokhale for the very kind words of his introduction. But I will start off with one aspect which he covered right in the beginning, when he covered that all the three services, BSF, the entire lot were involved in this operation, if I may simply put, because they're not really classically a war. And but what I think he summed up aptly, and this is something defining, is that it was an all-of-nation approach for the first time after I think possibly 1971. And I think after 1971, for the first time, military action, terror obviously, but military action as well, reached the entire nation and all its citizenry. So that's something absolutely different from the past. I'll just quickly run through the sequence in a manner where firstly the Pahalgam red line was crossed, and obviously the targeted attack on civilians, unlike the past where the targeting was on uniformed personnel. I think for the first time air power was used offensively to hit 9 separate targets. I mean, this was a step up from Balakot, and the targets hit simultaneously from POJK, but also in the Punjabi heartland, and subsequent attacks also followed as a follow-on of past, immediate retaliation. I'll quick little bit of background which I want to put in context because it's very important, because use of air power in Indian history has always been constrained and restrained. Whether it was 1947 to 48, where we didn't commit all our forces, we couldn't cross the suggested, the front edge of the battle spaces because of political restraints from the British, especially. 1962, we know what happened. Offensive air power was not included in a scheme of things of our operations, much to the, I think, regret of something which we will continue over the years. 65, I think after 1962, it was more of a redemption of the 3 services, especially of the Army and the Air Force, where the Army for the Army, Air Force for the Air Force, essentially. But again, it was constrained because we couldn't attack initially, didn't have the initiative to attack initially, and half or more than about 40% of our forces were tied up in the eastern sector for a possible Chinese incursion. And similarly, in 1999, we were constrained again. We couldn't cross the LOC, and so it was only effectively in 1971 that really we used air power without constraints full-fledged. But the point I'm trying to make here is 71 war was 54 years ago, Kargil 26 years ago, and I think over this period of time, offensive air power and its salience slipped somewhat from the minds of a nation, the military, the strategic community, and the civilians especially. And I think we were caught up and overwhelmingly in the somewhat service-specific, domain-centric outlook towards the continental domain and the maritime domain, which is justifiable because the continental domain is a serious security threat, and the maritime domain is a strategic necessity. When Balakot strike happened, a Rubicon was crossed for the first time with offensive air power. It was used offensively. Do remember that in the past, historically, air power was always considered escalatory. But this changed in Balakot, where we hit targets inside the enemy territory at Jabba Top. It was one single strike, and this strike, I'm afraid, while it possibly deterred the Pakistani terror to not carry out large-scale attacks for some time, it did not obviously deter them forever. It was obviously clear in the Pahalgam attack. But one point I want to make here is that how an accurate strike by the Indian Air Force, with albeit all its limitations, which went inside the enemy airspace under their air defense cover and hit them decisively, but the plot was lost subsequently because of a poor narrative building and a counter information warfare by Pakistani, and followed on the next 2 days later with the shooting down of the MiG-21 Bison with Wing Commander Abhinandan, and the entire media focus shifted on this and took away the strategic outcome which we wanted to achieve, and we lost out on that. Not so this time. In the past, we did have 2 opportunities post 2001 December Parliament attack and 2008 November 26 Mumbai attack, where the Air Force was ready, as Air Chief Marshal Fali Major has put it out in the open domain, but it was not used possibly because of escalation, issues of large-scale activation, operational readiness, and most certainly political will. But Today, things entirely changed with the Baisran attack, where 26 people were killed, with very targeted, very specifically. So I'll not go into the details, but it was certainly a pre-planned attack from the PAF point of view, given their AD deployment of their Chinese weapon systems, the quick integration, and flying in of not only all kinds of support assets, but most certainly PL-15 missiles, just about 3 weeks before their entire present operation. So the IF operation started on 7th of May. It was the usual, if I may say, business as usual time at the wee hours of between 1 o'clock and 1:30, 1:05, in fact, 23 minutes as what the media is calling it. I think the same thing happened in Balakot as well. But this time, unlike the past, look at the scale of the attack. Instead of one target, we hit 9 targets out of possible 21. And these 9 were chosen based on available, the latest current intelligence, and which was made available to the planners. But also do remember this targeting of 9 targets across a wide scale of almost 1,000 kilometer plus frontage would have needed enormous planning of resources, all kinds of effects, and extensive interaction between intelligence, the all other 3 services, and every player possible. So I think the stage was set by the PM's meeting, which he had with the RM, with the CDS, with the 3 service chiefs. And I think that laid down the tone and tenor that for the first time after a long time, actually, the Indian military instrument was used right from the beginning together, from the planning stages to the execution stage. And that is the biggest possible takeaway. There was extensive, this time around, luckily, thanks to the access of open source media and a lot of other players, OSINT available, the effects of the targeting was made visible very easily. And it was visible to the world over. And the first time, I think, air power was hyphenated with terror targeting in the lower end of the spectrum, warfare spectrum, that is a sub-conventional scale. So what were the effects that followed? There was also an extensive air engagement in which the PAF had got airborne in large numbers. But thereafter, interestingly, the PAF fell back to the depth bases. But they did carry out attacks with drones and missiles on all our frontline targets, a lot of civilian targets, and very interestingly, Air Force targets. I think this was a mistake which they probably underestimated the kind of reaction they will get, and it tantamounted to escalation, because after all, technically hitting an airbase is a military target. And I suspect our leadership saw it as so. And I have retaliated on the 10th of May with a combination of anti-air defense and counter-air offensive missions, actually, specifically targeting key centers of gravity in these air bases, stretching all the way from Skardu right down to Sakar near Karachi, all the way down. And that is amazing. 11 airfields were hit. And I will not go into the details. The details are available to everybody with a little bit of Google search, and it's all over the social media. But needless to say, every airfield which was hit, a specific target system was hit as a showcase of our, and this targeting was absolutely standoff, but it showcased our offensive capability and lethality, because the outcome of this is what was put across to the PAF very clearly, that look, this is just an opener, that it indicated our depth of penetration, our precision targeting capability. Mass would have followed if they continued to choose to escalate, because then each of those targets would have been struck en masse with larger firepower, offensive power. So I think the key standouts, I'll just summarize, bring everything together. The key standouts which I would take from a air power perspective was the first and foremost was revival of offensive air power as a potent instrument of military, potent military instrument in a nation's response matrix in national security. I think that this I can't underscore adequately enough. And this, do remember, it is this offensive capability which put PAF under, not only PAF, obviously the Pakistani nation as a whole, under tremendous pressure, and possibly, in all possibility, force the DGMO to make the telephone call. So the scale of this attack, that means the calibrated selective targeting of centers of gravity, was symbolic of IS offensive capability. Despite all the limitations that we've been hearing over the years, it was an indication that it has immense offensive capability, and which was, I think, leveraged very effectively after a long time. Depth, we've seen the depth and the spread of targeting. It was all across the entire Pakistani border. Precision was absolutely clear. Speed and precision of response. And like I said, mass of attack would have been the next logical step in the escalation ladder. Offensive integrated air defense. And I use the word offensive because I think the air defense word, and I've been talking about this for the last 5 years, is the word air defense is probably today a misnomer, because air defense technically, where we should defend our own territory inside our sovereign airspace is no longer the same. We have actually had the capability which we have displayed of our air defense spilling across well into the adversarial territorial airspace to exercise domination over their airspaces and be able to target the adversary over their airspace. It effectively forced the PAF to be on the defensive back foot, and they could not even get airborne up to a certain distance from the borders and stayed well clear of this. And a key player in this obviously was the S-400, which enabled us to give us what I call offensive air defense. So today, what integrated air defense, or IAD, which is probably known by most people, which is a combination of all sensors, shooters, that means all radars, and surface-to-air missiles and interceptors, all integrated in a multi-tiered manner, which covers a multi-dimensional, three-dimensional volume of airspace, which spills into enemy air territory. So this is what integrated air defense is all about, where, because the entire assets, air defense assets, are very finely integrated by means and network on what was, I think, the biggest success story, which has which has been lost out in the narrative, is the ISCCS, India's Integrated Air Command and Control System, which we've had for over a decade and refined it to an art form, including more and more sensors and shooters, and reducing the sensor shooter reaction time. That means from the time an adversary is spotted to the time it is acted against in a kinetic manner is what the sensor shooter timeline is. And this has been shrunk drastically. One aspect I will bring out here, the Akash Tir, which is also an immense success story, which I'm sure our speaker, who is also who will cover this subsequently, but it was also a success story because it covered the lower end of the air defense spectrum. Means when it comes to the tactical bases and the frontal areas, which is in the immediate frontage between 1 to 2, 3, 4 kilometers of the frontage. And this is where, interestingly, our older AD systems, the guns, came into enormous effect in targeting drones. And this is where I think our a growing industry, startups and MSMEs and the civilian industry came in terms of anti-drone measures and anti-US systems, which all brought in together. But what was amazing is the entire synergy of this entire air defense system, which was played out very effectively, and it gives gives us a focus area for the future, which I'll delve also when I sum up in the end. Next important aspect is the fact of that offensive air power and air defense. And this is something, again, I must emphasize something that we need to give adequate attention. And I'm again writing about this for a long time. They are conjoined twins. They are inseparable. They are hand in hand. You cannot take away one for the other. And this offensive capability and defensive capability showed its merit. And in this operation, do remember, it also showcased the limitations of PAF's offensive capability and the limitations of their air defense. The next important thing is the use of air power against terror in the low end of the subconventional scale. This is something we have eschewed from a long time, because like I mentioned earlier, air power is to be considered escalatory. But I think this time around, post Balakot, we have a set of precedents by the sheer scale and numbers of targets we have attacked. And very interestingly, this targeting has forced the out into the open the close or the synergy of the terror and the terror perpetuators, that is the Pakistani military. And by we've been able to target both by the same brush, and that is, I think, the capability of air power. And very interestingly, it gave us the first response. It gave us a response which hit them hard, and it created the space for further, for a very calibrated escalation should it come about. It created the space and shaped the environment for should this have escalated into a full-scale war. It would have created the shape and battle spaces for the army to carry out their offensive missions, which would have possibly most certainly followed in case this had this escalated into a war. It brings back to the salience of the need for offensive targeting, and I can't underscore this enough, the need for offensive targeting in the nation's response matrix. Despite serious limitations of the Indian Air Force's capability, it performed, I think, very well and professionally with whatever capability it has. PAF weapon systems and their limitations are shown through. Important aspect here that it became a playground for Chinese weapons and Turkish weapon systems. Chinese air power has grown tremendously. Its aviation industry has grown at a trajectory which is pretty much stunning, which has a US worried. But very interestingly, there was always this question on the Chinese weapon system capabilities, and that I think was on display this time. With China obviously carrying out aggressive marketing of its weapon systems, and that is why you found a lot of Chinese-based media on their capability and the success of their weapons. But the real truth lies somewhere in between. PAF and PLAF, that means PAF, the Pakistani Air Force and Chinese Air Force, the collusivity is again something I've been harping on for the last, I think, I don't know how many years. This is something which has gone under the radar of most of our security thinkers. It has been tremendous, and it has shown through this time. And there is no denying that possibly there would have been Chinese air defense operators and other system operators who might as well have, in all probability, played part in this operation. So I will end this initial aspects with the need for urgent filling of gaps of IAF's requirements. This needs an urgent focus, which I'm sure it will get. One word on drones and missiles. Predictably, both sides, I think, used it, having learned watched the Russo-Ukraine war very closely. But high-end drones were seen for serious targeting and ISR. We have seen the Yeha, the Bayraktars, and the suicide drones and their effect. But their vulnerability to air defense has also been showcased and underscored in this. Low-end commercial drones proliferation has shown up in many ways, and not so much, I will say, in terms of targeting effects, really, but in the ability to create immense nuisance, immense media outrage, and create high visibility, and in their effort to set in panic amongst the civilian population, which I think are build up, and the civilian, the most strongest part, I think, was been the immense resilience of our civilians and their ability to take this in their stride. And I think that is one of the important aspects, that it has been a citizens' war, if I'm for the use of wrong words, but a citizens' active involvement in this conflict. But the drone story and missile story hasn't ended here. I will summarize this drone aspect on one fact, that do remember their vulnerability. They have certainly expanded the employment of air power to a wider scale in the use of the vertical domain by use of drones and missiles in the future. Their improvements and developments will certainly be an add-on in our future warfare. So I'll summarize with just two facts now. One was the enduring salience of air defense, offensive air power, and its synergy with air defense. Both have become vital ingredients in the nation's military strategy and must be taken so on board. That means in future, the air power must be considered from the entire range of spectrum of the nation's security matrix, right from the lowest end of the threshold, that is the subconventional gray zone end, to the highest nuclear end. Uh, Enormous takeaway. IF has always been, I will put it bluntly here without any openly, is the IF has always been a joint force. It has actively taken part with the other services all through, right from 65 was, I think, where the jointness really started. By 71, it was established. But I think somewhere along the way, post Kargil, again, 26 years of gap without a war does have effects. We were a little divergent in our outlooks, but I think it has all been brought together by the spectacular show of all of nation approach, and especially the three services bringing their core competencies to the table and laying it out in a sequence of involvement depending on who needed to act when. And I think this sets the showcase for all future conflicts that is to come. With that, I will end and I'll hand over to General Mahajan, or the next speaker. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Air Marshal Choudhury. Now we have Major General Vinay Handa, who will take on the army aspects and air defense in particular. Over to you, General Handa.
Good morning, sirs. It's my proud privilege to be part of this panel discussion on the OP Sindoor, which is being hosted by the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, Pune. And of course, being my focus would be to highlight the role of the Army Air Defense and how it fitted overall into the Operation Sindoor. At the beginning itself, I will just say that Army Air Defense operates within the larger framework of the National Air Defense Architecture, which is spearheaded by the Indian Air Force, of course. And where the Army Air Defense fits in, I'll just highlight that so that things fall in place when I speak of the Army Air Defense. The Army Air Defense is responsible for the point and the limited area air defense of the combat army, as well as a few strategic assets. We are equipped to deal with the low and medium altitude air threat. That is where the Army Air Defense overall fits into the National Air Defense Architecture. The primary role, of course, lies with the Indian Air Force. And while the focus has always been on the offensive strikes, like Air Marshal Choudhury also just brought out, it is very crucial to understand the critical role of air defense in such operations, which generally provides the necessary shield for the offensive actions and gives the necessary protection for our critical combat and the population centers and the other assets. We are all aware that this OP Sindoor was launched in the wake of the ongoing Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Hamas conflicts, which have been going on for last about 2 to 3 years. These are the conflicts which have led to a dramatic transformation of the air threat. So what had happened that earlier it was just that the conventional aircraft was considered as just the air threat. But over last about 3 to 4 years, the air threat has widened to the complete complex spectrum of air threats, which includes UAVs, drones, starting right from commercial to tactical to strategic drones with different roles and different capabilities. We have the combat Raptors and the civil Raptors, the ballistic as well as the cruise missiles, rockets, and other sophisticated aerial platforms which operate at different ranges and altitudes. Now, this is what is the type of air threat. The air threat has evolved tremendously from the combat aircraft which we always used to talk of. So as the air threat has evolved, so the challenge of providing air defense protection to a huge range of combat army threats population centers, as well as the strategic threats, has grown tremendously, because the defense also comes with the caveat of ensuring that there is enough offensive freedom which is imparted to our aircraft to operate. Because, like Air Marshal Choudhury just brought out, that offensive air defense is definitely a part of air defense. So air defense has to sort of balance out very well between the defense and ensuring that there is a complete freedom of action for our offensive aircrafts. And we are all aware that, okay, once having launched the strikes, we were ready for the retaliatory strikes, which obviously had to take place. So this period from, let's say, about 22nd April to 7th of April, about a fortnight period, gave us, I think, the necessary time and where we could sort of put in place our integrated air defense system was fully, it of course was already operational, but it was now completely seamlessly integrated, synergized within this period of 15 days. And we used this period of 15 days to our, I would say, maximum advantage. I would just now briefly explain what this integrated air defense, which we all have been hearing, and I'll just highlight a few aspects. It is a system which is basically based on different types of weapons, based on their capabilities, their ranges, their altitudes, the weapons which are being operated by the Air Force and which are also being operated by the Army Air Defense. It sort of basically rests on about 4 different layers, which includes starts from basically long-range surveillance centers. So there are just 3 major elements of this. One is that there are something which we need to detect. So this detection is being given by the longest range radars. Then there is a command and control center, which of course is the IACCS, and then the threat evaluation and the target designation, which takes place from the IACCS. Now, the different 4 layers of this were basically, the first layer is basically the shortest range weapon systems, and it is designed to provide point air defense protection and counter very short range aerial threats, especially the low altitude drones, UAVs, and the aircrafts. It has the weapon systems like the L-70 anti-aircraft guns. We have the man-pad systems, which include the Igla 1S, and of course, a few Strelas, which are still there, the ZU-23mm twin-barrel guns, as well as certain tracked platforms like the Shilkas and the Tungushka weapon systems. So these weapon systems, this first layer caters for a range of almost about 10 kilometers and an altitude of just about 4 to 5 kilometers. The second layer comes with the weapon systems like the Akash, that is the surface to air missile systems, which includes weapon systems like Akash, Spider system, Pichoras, and the Asaike systems. These are designed to intercept incoming aerial threats up to a range of about 40 kilometers and a altitude of about 10 kilometers. The third layer, which in effect is basically that, okay, which includes the medium range surface to air missiles like the MR-SAM, which is there with the Air Force, as well as which is there with the Army, that is the Barak, as well as the MR-SAM of the Army. This caters for a range of almost about 80 to 100 kilometers and an altitude of about 25 kilometers. The last layer, of course, is with the most capable system, which is the S-400, with a range of almost about 400, can take on target almost 300 targets simultaneously. And this is the system which allows for interception well before the hostile targets approach Indian airspace, provide a formidable long-range protective barrier. So these are the 4 layers. Of course, there is adequate coverage between all the layers. All the ranges are covered and all the altitudes are covered. The hub of these layers, of course, is all being controlled by the ISCCS, which was just brought out by the previous speaker. And it was here for the first time that the Indian Army's Akash Tir system was also integrated. So I'll a brief word about this Akash Tir system. Akash Tir is a system which Army had been sort of following up for almost 2 decades. And this is a system, what was happening previously was that the air picture used to come from the long range and all the radars of the Army, of the Indian Air Force. Whereas we also have Army radars which are deployed in tactical as well as certain forward areas, and which also cover the gaps between the Air Force. So this radar picture was not being fused at the IACCS end. So having developed and integrated this Akash Tir system, so this picture from the lowest radars, tactical picture, also got fused at the IACCS, and there was a complete automation of between the Air Force as well as between the Army sensors and shooters. So this gave us a complete advantage over here, and this was possible. This has been done at present only in the Northern Command, and we are sure that within next about 1 or 2 months, this will follow up in the other commands too also. And so when basically what happened, starting from night of 7th to 8th of May, when Pakistan attempted to engage a large number of our military targets in northern as well as western India, which starting from the airfields up north, Avantipura, Srinagar, Jammu, Pathankot, Amritsar, Kapurthala, Jalandhar, Ludhiana, Adampur, Batinda, Nal, Chandigarh, Falodi, Uttarlai and Bhuj, using their drones and missiles. But these were all neutralized by our integrated air defense system, which was already in place. And then we also had an integrated US grid, which was also in place. That is the unmanned aerial systems grid. So this unmanned aerial system grid is in effect a direct fallout of the integrated air defense system. And this integrated counter drone system was basically that we employed a blend of different technologies to counter the drones which were used by our adversaries. These different technologies included soft as well as hard kills. That is, it included the radio frequency jammers, GPS spoofing, then we had the optical sensors, then we had the radar-based detections, and of course, laser kills to some degrees were used and they were also effective. And of course, we did employ the kinetic means in terms of our ground-based AD weapon systems. And these were integrated with the weapon system radars for detection purposes, as well as with the other command and control systems. These counter US grid also operated in multiple layers. The success of this integrated air defense system as well as the counter US system is well known from all the reports. It is believed that Pakistan had launched almost about 300 to 400 drones on these 3 successive nights. And there are reports of almost about 50 to 60 drones being brought down. And there is a concrete evidence which includes recoveries of pieces of PL-15 missiles of Chinese origin, Turkish origin, UAVs named Sundura, Yiha, Turkish, of course, TB2, and a other variety of long-range rockets, quadcopters, and commercial drones. So this was the integrated Army air defense as well as the counter-US system. So I'll just a couple of other points. Of course, this was a typical classical textbook display of synergy and seamless integration, which was, I think, witnessed for the first time between the 3 services, and particularly Army Air Defense and the Indian Air Force on the completely along the western borders. The IACCS and the Akash Tir integration was indeed a force multiplier, which was witnessed. And what happened, we even at the terminal weapon ends of the lowest of the Army Air Defense, we could get a recognized air situation picture immediately, which gave us the liberty to take on the targets without sort of endangering own aircraft. And apart from it is not just the seamless integration of technology, it is also the conceptual and doctrinal synergy which the Army Air Defense and the Air Force have been, I think, practicing for last about 3 to 4 years as part of lessons which we learned from the Russo-Ukraine war. These were in the brief periods of all the Army SATs and Air Force SATs, these mutual participations of both the reps of the air defense and I think Army Air Force did pay actual dividends here. And of course, just a few certain other issues. And these are basically, even beyond this tactical brilliance, what actually stood out was the seamless integration of indigenous high-tech systems into the national defense, whether it was drone warfare, layered air defense, or the electronic warfare capabilities. This operation, it marks a milestone in the India's journey towards tech self-reliance. If I just tell you the vintage of these L-70 and ZU guns, these are of the vintage of the, I would say, early 70s. And it was the, I would say, the upgradations which have taken place by the DRDO, Bell, and the private industries, which I think acted which empowered these systems to even take on the modern air threats. Just a minor, I would say, modifications or upgradations. L-70 system, there was a basically analog sight which was converted into a digital sight. A new hydraulic system was fitted in, and the game changer was the ammunition. Earlier, it was just we had a basically impact ammunition. Now, what was designated was a proximity fused ammunition. Proximity fused ammunition basically enables that from a certain distance itself the fuse detonates and the explosion takes place. That is a big changer in taking on any of these drones. The ZU gun, again, we went in for a new digital sight and a new hydraulic system was fitted in. Gun, again, of a vintage of 60s and early 70s. It has a high rate of fire of almost 2,000 rounds per minute from 4 barrels. And it has been even fitted on the Tatra chases so that even it gives you the necessary mobility and you can even go ahead and take on these targets. This is what took place in this Pathankot sector, where these guns were mounted in, I would say, on these Tatra vehicles, and our AD weapon systems, they even fired on these Tatras while moving. The mobility-based platforms were activated to take on this at the forward edge of the battlefields. Then, of course, the Akash Tir has been a big game changer, again designed and developed by the Bell system. And of course, we have seen the success of the Akash missile system, MR-SAM systems, and the new modification which is being taken place, carried out on the manpad systems, going in for a laser type of a beam riding. So from air defense systems to drones, counter drones capabilities, and to the network-centric warfare platforms, indigenous technology and the initiatives of, I think, Atmanirbhar have really started to pay off. The ecosystem in terms of public-private partnership systems, R&D capabilities growing up, and the public execution and mass production taking place. However, we are yet to catch up with the technological cycles. So there is definitely a need that we speed up our production cycles to match the technological cycles. And of course, I've already talked of the seamless integration which took place. Then this integration led to successful deterrence and interception. And there was no major damage which could be imparted. And it was a clear display of the sheer power of the legacy AD systems and the modern AD systems, which I have already pointed out. And this training which was carried out between the Army and Air Force and the joint training again paid off, because ultimately it is not only the technology which gets integrated into your mindsets which need to be integrated to actually make it a force multiplier. And of course, the conflict also brought out the efficacy or the inefficacy of the Chinese air defense systems. We saw that the Air Force could easily neutralize HQ-9 and HQ-16. So whenever I think there are a few lessons or a few pointers which have come out, that if at all we need to engage some adversaries along the northern borders, maybe, okay, we have tried and tested their technologies. This could form some sort of, I would say, planning parameters. A few this thing that, okay, we have already talked of, that there is definitely a need to induct these modern systems. Because what happens basically, the detection of these drones, small drones, and even the tactical and medium level drones is very, very difficult. These drones were not picked up in the on the radar. It was only the visual, because they were coming at the night, and it was only the optical and the visual this thing. They provided us that type of this thing, so we could pick it up and we could engage them. But picking up these drones still remains a challenge. We need to go in for higher capability based radars of the ISA type of varieties. And the counter drones and the counter drone game continues to be a cat and mouse game. Of course, we need to be up and about it. Employed have integrated systems which have not only just one technologies, which have 2-3 technologies to take on drones. The recent, I think, demonstration of Bhargavastra a couple of days back, where it can fire almost about 200 to 300 projectiles, will definitely be a game changer. Airspace management is going to be a major challenge. It was just a conflict of, I think, just about 4 days, very short, very intense. And there were no combat aviation hapters. Once hapters come in, the airspace management becomes a real big challenge. And there are going to be sort of big hit. Certain radars will be down, certain radars will be up. So those factors have not been built into this, because it was, I think, a classical display of one-sided, I would say, dominance. So airspace management, we need to be continuously up and about it. And otherwise, of course, the tactics and procedures, we need to sort of be up and about it always. Cyber defense will definitely need to be looked at, because all Air Force and the Army air defense systems work on network operational systems. And these are very, very vulnerable to the cyber attacks. We need to sort of harden these and make them much, much more robust. So in conclusion, I would just say that this operation of just about 4 days, it has reaffirmed the indispensable role of the Army air defense in India's overall security and operational architecture. However, this operation has also served as a reminder of the need for continuous modernization, enhanced capabilities, particularly in the realm of counter UAS and advanced technologies, and need to continuously deepen our joint manship and synergies. I finished.
Thank you, Jan Handa, for reminding us as to how the legacy air defense systems and the modern air defense systems work together, and how the minds of the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army Air Defense have got integrated together. Thank you. We go on to the next speaker now. Admiral Nadkarni is the next speaker, and he'll talk about the naval issues. Over to Admiral Nadkarni. You can switch on your
Thank you, sir.
mic and your.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can
Yeah.
you?
Thank you, sir. I'll just share my presentation.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
So firstly, I would like to thank the CAS for inviting me to be part of this panel with such esteemed speakers such as Air Marshal Choudhury as well as General Handa. I'll basically discuss the role of the Indian Navy with respect to what I assess to be its operations, since unlike the Army and Air Force, there wasn't very much till the last few days which was available in the public domain. The operations would have basically flowed from these two documents, which are the Indian Navy Strategy and Doctrines, both of which were updated, I would say, in 2016. In fact, the strategy document was brought out in 2016, but the doctrine document was actually an updated version of the original document, which was brought out in 2009. And both these documents essentially talk about what will be the role of the Indian Navy. There are 4 roles, of which the military role was seen during OP Sindoor, whereas during peace or during low-intensity maritime operations, you have constabulary operations such as anti-piracy operations, which the Indian Navy has been doing with great success in the Arabian Sea as well, as you would probably know. You have diplomatic role, which basically comprises flag-showing missions, which serve to highlight our growing military-industrial complex in terms of the warship building and so on. And you have the benign operations, which are essentially things like carrying out HADR operations during times of natural disasters. Our national maritime interests, which the Indian Navy is meant to protect, are shown on this slide. You can just read basically what they are. And primarily the military role comprises the first one, which is protect India's sovereignty and territorial integrity against threats in the maritime environment. From this, we have our maritime security aims and objectives, and aim being, as I mentioned, to safeguard our national maritime interest at all times. And the objectives are further amplifying this, which are to deter conflict and coercion against India, which is basically during peacetime. But when we are in a conflict such as OP Sindoor, then the Indian Navy has to conduct maritime military operations in a manner that enables the early termination of conflict on terms which are favorable to India, which, as you know, actually was the outcome of this particular operation. And the last few things are not so much concerned with the military role as such. They are more concerned with the other three roles. And in this maritime security strategy, there are basically 5 components, of which the 4 of them are again basically meant for the peacetime, whenever we are not in conflict. But when we are going into a conflict, then of course the strategy for conflict kicks in. And this strategy for conflict has certain objectives, missions, and tasks. The objectives are basically to achieve a decisive military victory, to defend our territorial integrity, our citizens, and our offshore assets. We have these offshore assets, which are also called the offshore development areas, like Bombay High, on both the west coast as well as the east coast, and now they're also coming up in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Then to influence affairs on land. This is sometimes overlooked by some of our citizens, but we now have the capability also, through our various actions, influence these affairs. Also, one very important role or objective is to safeguard our maritime, marine, as well as our maritime trade. Now, from these objectives, the missions which derive are the nuclear second strike. We have, as you are aware, 2 nuclear SSBMs or ballistic missile submarines, which are capable of also launching ballistic or nuclear missiles. This is something which Pakistan does not have. In addition to that, MDA stands for the Maritime Domain Awareness, which is essentially that we keep the entire area of interest whenever we are in a conflict under surveillance, and we know exactly which are the platforms which are there operating in that area, and those which are inimical to us and which we can therefore target. Then these 2 important missions, which are sea control and sea denial, and then something which has been talked about a lot in the media, which is basically the blockade, which I'll also describe in a few slides time. Then power projection, force protection, expeditionary ops. Now, this is essentially amphibious operations, which was not done obviously for various reasons during this particular operations. It will generally be done in a full-fledged war, and that too towards the end of the war, when you have achieved air supremacy and total sea control over that area. Compellence means basically the use of your own power and the threat that can pose to change the enemy's behavior, which was also seen during OP Sindoor from the point of view of the Indian Navy. Destruction, slot interdiction, slot protection. Destruction, of course, is quite self-explanatory, basically destroy the PN assets. But slot interdiction, that is to target the Pakistan trade, which is essential for its economy and which I'll also be talking about a little more in detail, that also will go a long way in the termination of the conflict. At the same time, we have to protect our own slops. Slops, for those who are not aware, stand for sea lines of communication, which are essentially the routes which merchant ships carrying vital cargo, especially those which are required for the war-waging effort, are traversing from the source to the destination. Also, you may see special forces operations. In the case of Pakistan, they have a special force called the SSGN, and we ourselves have our own Marcos. Then, of course, you have to also protect your own coast through measures such as seaward defense, coastal and offshore defense. And from these missions, you have tasks, surveillance, patrol, maritime strike, ASW, anti-surface operations, anti-air operations, amphibious operations, information operations, and so on. NCADs and NCS operations. This, for those of you who may not be aware, basically this is naval control and advice on guidance of shipping. Basically, whenever our own ships are moving from one port to the other, normally a foreign port, then we provide them some routing information on how to traverse so that they remain outside possibly the range of enemy units, which can also interdict them. And VBSS operations are basically visit, board, search and seizure. That means that when you intercept or interdict an enemy or likely enemy ship, you send a boarding party to go on that ship, check all its documents, and then see whether it is actually an enemy ship or just a neutral. Coming to the sea control and sea denial. Now, sea control is a central concept of the Indian Navy, which we have perfected over several years. And it involves establishing and maintaining dominance over a specific maritime area, which in this case would be the North Arabian Sea, to ensure the freedom of action of our own forces while enabling the safe use of sea routes for military as in commercial purposes. And it requires the ability to project power, protect shipping, and conduct offensive or defensive operation. And the force and the platforms which essentially give us this capability are the two aircraft carriers which we have, which are INS Vikrant, which is an indigenous aircraft carrier, as you probably know, and INS Vikramaditya, which we acquired from Russia. On the other hand, sea denial is a role which is more suited to the Pak Navy, since it does not have an aircraft carrier, and it aims primarily to prevent an adversary, which in this case would be the Indian Navy, from using a maritime area effectively without necessarily establishing full control, and it focuses on disrupting or restricting our operations through asymmetric or defensive tactics. The units which, or the platforms which the Pak Navy would be using in this case would be in all probability submarines, and as in the past it also used the P-3C Orion. It's a long-range maritime patrol aircraft which was equipped with the Harpoon missile, which could target even our carrier battle group, because at that time the Harpoon would outrange the range of the surface-to-air missiles which we had. But in this day and age, that does not hold. So presently, the only units which probably can carry out the sea denial effectively in the case of Pak Navy are the submarines. I'll come to this concept of blockade, which has been talked about in the media as well. So blockade essentially refers to the control of maritime choke points. I'll just show a slide in the next one, which shows which are the choke points concerning the Indian Ocean. And if you can control these, they would restrict an adversary's access to resources, trade, or military reinforcements. In the 1971 war, we enforced a blockade of East Pakistan using our carrier, the first INS Vikrant, and that totally not only closed the trade, but also prevented them from getting any reinforcement from, say, West Pakistan, which was a key contributor to the early termination of that war. Secondly, blockade involves economic warfare, which means cutting off trade, energy supplies, or critical imports. And in the case of Pakistan's, whose economy is already in a pretty desperate state, that would have a very drastic impact on how it's able to wage war or continue to wage war. Next is the denial of the military mobility, which prevents our adversaries from deploying naval forces or receiving military supplies, which means that if you have a force which is completely dominant in that area and can target the enemy at extended ranges while remaining well outside their own missile or say even the submarine ranges, then it would prevent them from moving as freely as they would want. The next, all this would add up to a psychological and political impact, which would signal our resolve and can also pressure the adversary politically by isolating them diplomatically or economically. So the actions for a blockade are the declaration of a blockade and having the necessary wherewithal, which we did have, to enforce it. Next, of course, in the beginning, there would be a lot of neutral shipping also, which would be traversing this area and also probably going to the enemy ports. So you have to basically tell them that they have to avoid this blockaded area, otherwise they are liable to get targeted. and that you do through what you call a notice to mariners. And if at the end of this, there are still ships which are seen to be proceeding to enemy ports, they are assumed to be carrying contraband, and there's an international law called the law of contraband, which means that these ships can be targeted legitimately or be interdicted. These are the choke points which are there in the Indian Ocean. The primary ones which would concern us would be the Strait of Hormuz, and this is because a large number of oil supplies, mostly for Pakistan but also for India, traverse through the strait. And secondly is the Bab el-Mandeb, which is at the end of the Red Sea, and of course before that we have the Suez Canal, through which also a large number of supplies would be traveling and then going to the respective ports, some of them to India, some of them to even Pakistan, and maybe others to some other ports which are there in the Indian Ocean. Of course, as you are aware, this Red Sea also now, because of the actions of the Houthis, has also seen a sharp downturn in the overall trade. In fact, 60% of container traffic has been reduced because of the attacks which are being carried out by the Houthis. Then you have other choke points such as the Cape of Good Hope, and most ships which are now avoiding the Red Sea are coming around the Cape of Good Hope. Then you have the choke point at the Mozambique Canal. You have all these straits which are there in Southeast Asia. These are primarily for trade which is coming from the eastern sources. We get some oil from Sakhalin also, or rather it comes to Vladivostok and then it's shipped to India. So they would have to traverse either the Malacca Straits or the Sunda Straits or the Lombok Straits, or even say sometimes the Omba and Betar Straits. And if you can have naval forces at each of these straits instead of having them in some general area in the North Arabian Sea, you would be able to better identify and then interdict merchant ships which are trying to get to Pakistan carrying all this trade. Let me show the importance of sea trade for India's economy, and then I'll come to Pakistan's economy. Now, sea trade is very important to most littoral nations, and in let's say practical terms, it's about 95% of the total trade by volume and about 70% by value. And it is particularly important for us in terms of the oil imports or the energy imports. Own production being only 12%, we are constrained to import 88% of our oil from overseas. In the past, most of our oil used to come from Saudi Arabia and from Iraq, but this has changed in the last, I would say, 4 years since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war. And from 2% in 2021, we now acquire about or import about 35 to 40% of our oil from Russia. So we have cut down on our imports from Saudi Arabia. This has actually been the most significant. So Saudi Arabia is only now for about 15 to 16%. Then we have other suppliers such as UAE, the US, which also is trying to increase its own exports to us, and then Kuwait and some other countries. And our crude oil terminals, this is also important. In the past, we had a single crude oil terminal, which was Wadinar in the Gulf of Kutch. And being in the Gulf of Kutch, this was a vulnerability because it could be, or ships which are proceeding there could be targeted by PN units. But since then, we have diversified and we have got several other crude oil terminals, some of them on the west coast. But in particular, if you see Paradip, it has a VLCC that stands for a very large crude carrier, which means a very large oil tanker. And it can also be used for getting our oil imports. And therefore, if need be, we can sort of circumvent Jamnagar and Wadinar so that the PN is unable to target those ships. And then you have several other ports as shown on the slide. Just for information, this term Suezmax and Aframax is a designator of the size. Suezmax is basically the largest size of a vessel that can travel through the Suez Canal, and Aframax is a size which is smaller than the Suezmax. It does not stand for Africa as such, but it is just a denomination. And for Pakistan economy, Pakistan imports also around 80 to 85% of its oil. But in its case, it imports most of it from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iran. So as you can see, all of them are in the Persian Gulf, and therefore all its tankers or most of its tankers have to come out of the Persian Gulf and then proceed to their wherever they are going to put the oil. So therefore, Pakistan relies on sea routes for 100% of its crude oil imports, and its major ports are Karachi, which handles about 60% of its trade, then Mohammed bin Qasim, which is just to the east of Pakistan, of Karachi, and then Gwadar, which is at the west end, and it's also the beginning of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But it just handles about 5% of the total trade, and certainly no oil comes to Gwadar. And Pakistan is dependent on this agency, that is the Pakistan National Shipping Corporation, which is the only domestic flag carrier, and its share in the sea trade of Pakistan has declined now from about 26% in 2014 to about 13% in 2018. And it is mainly involved in the shipping of crude oil, which is dependent on 5 double Alpha-Max tankers with a capacity just over 1 lakh tons and 2 product tankers, which have about 74,000 tons each. If you compare the Indian and Pak merchant fleets, well, there is no comparison, as you can clearly see on this slide. Our world ranking is 15th, while the Pakistan's is about 113th at present. Coming to the Indian Navy versus Pak Navy, again, there is really no comparison in terms of the platforms. We have 2 aircraft carriers, we have over 18 submarines, including 2 SSBNs and about 16 diesel electric submarines, whereas Pakistan just has 8. The Agosta 90V being a French submarine, and the Hangor class. This is interesting because this submarine is basically a derivative of the Yuan class, which China produces indigenous for its own PLA Navy. But now they are supplying these submarines to Pakistan. AIP stands for Air Independent Propulsion, which means that a submarine can remain underwater for much longer than the conventional diesel electric submarine. Destroyers, we have 13, and these are of the latest class, like the Kolkata and Visakhapatnam class, whereas Pakistan has none. We have about 14 frigates, whereas Pakistan has 9. Again, both these type 054A and the F-22P are acquired from China. We have about 18 of the corvettes. Kamorta are basically VSW corvettes, whereas the Kukri and Kora are the missile corvettes, whereas Pakistan just has 1 of the Babar class or the Miljam class, which is constructed by Turkey. Then we have 4 tankers, whereas Pakistan has 2. And the local naval defense vessels, we have about 135, which are both missile vessels as well as anti-submarine vessels, and of course general purpose patrol vessels, whereas the Pak Navy just has about 30 to 40. Similarly, in terms of naval aviation, we have a total asymmetry. We do have about 40 MiG-29 fighters, whereas Pakistan doesn't have any, though of course they use Air Force MiG Mirage 3 and 5 in the JF-17 for maritime strike. We have about 12 of the P-8I LRMR, which has been a game changer in our maritime ops, and also some Dorniers. Pakistan still has the legacy P-3C Orion, as well as the ATR-72. And in terms of helicopters also, we have recently acquired this MH-60R Seahawk, which has replaced most of our Sea Kings and is a very good platform for anti-submarine warfare. We also have the AEW Camo 31, which can provide air early warning to a fleet at sea. And for that, you don't require an AVAX all the time over the fleet. Drones, as some of you may have read in the papers, we have these 2 MQ-9A Reapers and are likely to get 15 more. I believe that the Army and Air Force also are getting something like 16, 8 each from the US, though I don't know the timeline for its delivery. And we have the older Israeli Herons and Searchers. Pakistan Navy just has 2 of these Luna drones, apparently. So comparison of platforms shows that our majority of our platforms are indigenously constructed, with our foreign suppliers being only Russia, US, Israel, and France, whereas a majority of the Pak platforms have been acquired from China. And they also are supplied by France, Turkey, and the US. whereas it does not possess any aircraft carrier, destroyers, and nuclear submarines, and has only 2 fleet tankers. As far as the missile systems are concerned, here is where you can say that there is some comparability in both our systems. However, the sheer volume of platforms that we have sort of nullifies this comparison in terms of, let's say, range. I won't go into the details because I think some of these are actually well known, and also missiles with the Navy, such as the BrahMos, are also there now with the Army and Air Force. Just to inform that the BrahMos was originally inducted as an anti-ship missile, which means it was a radar homing missile with a range of about 290 kilometers. But since then, they have developed a land attack and extended range version with a range of about 600 kilometers. And therefore, the Navy is well positioned to attack even targets which are deep in the hinterland of Pakistan. We have also many of these surface-to-air missiles, which are primarily Israeli in origin. As I mentioned, the P-3C Orion, which could earlier attack our fleet at sea with impunity, now cannot do that because of these MR-SAMs and LR-SAMs, which are the ranges as shown. I'll also harp upon this possible Pak-China collusion, which obviously, though there is plausible deniability, but it is also quite a likelihood that China could have shared some of its satellite imagery with Pakistan. Now, you all probably know that China has got a whole range of satellites which can do various functions such as optical imaging, SCR, that is synthetic aperture radar, and ELINT. And for us, the one which is most of concern is this what is called a Yaogan 41. Now, most remote sensing satellites or spy satellites are the low Earth orbit type, which are in the polar orbit, and they have very, very narrow swaths, though they have a high resolution. But this is actually unsuitable for detecting units at sea, for which we require a satellite which can cover the entire area and thereafter designate targets of interest, which can then be sort of passed on to the low Earth orbit satellites for further classification. So therefore, the Yaogan 41 is a geostationary satellite, and by that, it can actually cover the entire Indian Ocean, and it has a resolution of something like 2.5 meters. Based on that, it can decide which are warships, which are not warships, and pass that on to maybe the low Earth orbit satellites for identification also. And then they have these other Gaufen and Yunhai and Jildin and so on like that. So as of now, China operates over 1,000 satellites, of which around 500 are dedicated just to ISR. Let me now just highlight some of the statements which were made by the DGNO, which were, towards, of course, at the end of when the ceasefire came out. And I'll just give my own interpretation on what he was trying to say. So he was talking about forward deployment and deterrence. I'll let you read the actual statements. But essentially what he was saying is that we have this carrier battle group, which was exercising sea control while maneuvering in the North Arabian Sea. And therefore, from its position, it was capable of interdicting both Pakistan trade as well as the Pakistan Navy ships, while ensuring the air defense and the ASW defense of our own formation. And it was also poised to attack the land or coastal targets if required. As I said, we had the BrahMos land attack missile, and that was a weapon of choice in this case. Our submarines mostly would have been on offensive patrols. We would have L&D forces, both missile as well as anti-submarine ships, on defensive tasks of our own harbors as well as coastline, as well as to defend our VSVPs and the offshore defense area. Then the maritime domain awareness would have been provided by these platforms as shown, and it would have been also augmented with the satellite surveillance of our Pak ports. Next, he talked about rapid response and combat readiness. So the Indian Navy was fully prepared for action within 96 hours. Generally, ships are always fueled and provisioned, at all times after they return to harbor. The only thing which is not done is basically the missile loading. So this would mean that this 96 hours would be required for arming whatever ships you have with surface to surface and other missiles which you require. And all operational ships would have been likely to put to sea shortly thereafter, because you would expect that an enemy submarine would be also deployed by Pakistan to patrol of our own harbors. And if you delay our deployment, then it's likely that when you leave the harbor, they could also be targeted by the Pakistan submarines. And our ships and our fleet was also exercised regularly in preparation for any escalation if that had been the case. He talked about maritime and air dominance. The carrier battle group would have been maintaining the air defense umbrella of the formation. There would have been a comprehensive MDA cover, and ships deployed along the coast. In addition to their local defense, they would also have provided radar surveillance to detect any enemy aircraft which would have been approaching the coast. And one aspect he mentioned was the contribution to ceasefire, which essentially means that the ever-present of the threat of the Indian Navy, not only to the war-waging efforts of Pakistan, but also to its sea trade and economy, given our massive firepower and overwhelming superiority with the Navy, contributed to the Pakistan initiating the ceasefire. And lastly, of course, he said that the Indian Navy remains deployed at sea in a credible deterrent posture to respond decisively to any inimical action. And this time, if Pakistan dares to take any action, they will know what we are going to do. So in conclusion, OP Sindoor saw the largest deployment of naval ships at sea since OP Parakram. There's a large asymmetry in force levels and firepower between the Indian Navy and Pak Navy. The PN ships were restricted to the deployments close to coast or probably remained in harbor because they did not want to get risked getting targeted by the Indian Naval Carrier Battle Group. There was an omnipotent threat of blockade and economic disruption which was posed by the Indian Navy. This caused a disproportionate psychological and political impact. The only deficiency which I can see is, unlike the, say, Chinese, which have the maritime surveillance satellite, we have yet to get this for our own military. And since I was serving in the Navy as the Director of Naval Intelligence Operations way back in 2005, when we had taken this case up that we need to have this, unfortunately, still we are lacking in this one capability, which I feel is vital to sort of having a complete maritime domain awareness over the Indian Ocean. Which that I have finished my presentation. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Admiral Nadkarni, for your presentation, and you told us how the Navy was able to exercise sea control over the Arabian Sea. Now we'll go on to the interactive session. And before we start, may I request those who wish to ask any questions to put it in the chat box. And we have Air Chief Marshal Pradeep Naik here. So may I request Air Chief Marshal Pradeep Naik to offer his comments, if any. Air Chief Marshal Naik. So you can switch on your audio and video, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. Very clear.
Okay, just a couple of a few bullet points. That's it. First is, I'd like to compliment all the three speakers. I think all of them spoke very well. Excellent, very well done. The difference was, Air Force gave very little history and a lot of action. Army gave a little more history and a little bit of action. And Navy gave a lot of history and no action, not much action. This is exactly how the OP Sindoor worked out, actually. But Navy does its job in the long term. Just keep it in mind. So starting with the name, Ravi, nothing personal.
Yes.
Starting with the name, I think it's a selection, beautiful name. Not only AIM, the name itself, Sindoor, a very apt and very, very good selection. It got the country together, you know, all the people of the country. Strategic surprise. This point has not been given sufficient importance. I think we achieved strategic surprise. This Bharat didn't know what was happening and when it was going to start. There was an exercise in Rajasthan and there was some water treaty going on, talks and all those things. I think that was very well done. Compliments to the planners. Phasing of escalation control. I think it was beautifully done. Every phase escalation was calculated and just that much escalation to get it below the nuclear line. Tech superiority, I think it's already been mentioned. Very well done. Target priorities, of course. First was the 9 terrorist camps. Next was air defense, and third was what we conventionally known as counter-air. Handling of media, I think, left a little to be desired, in my own opinion. Media control was good, but media could have been handled a little better, I feel. There are a lot of questions in everybody's minds. 2 top questions in everybody's minds. Did we lose any? And did we attack the nuclear facilities? I will give my 2 and a bit purely personal. I think as far as Kirana is concerned, yes, in my opinion, we did. As far as own losses are concerned, I think we did lose. It looks to me like that. Maybe 1 odd. And probably in the initial part when we were hesitating to shoot across the border. That's my opinion. Otherwise, I think a beautiful presentation given by each one of the speakers. My compliments to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now we switch on to the question that we have in the chat box. The first one, or rather the first 2 are from Group Captain Purohit. I'll just read this out and then I will request the panelists to answer them. He's not specified anybody, but we'll start off with the Air Force first and then the MG Air Defense and for the Navy. The stellar performance of our air defense in OP Sindoor has been commendable. However, considering the advances made by the PLA Air Force, including the hypersonic weapons, what lessons and steps need to be taken to effectively neutralize such threats of PLA Air Force in case of any eventuality? So, any thoughts, Marshal Choudhury first?
Thank you, sir. I think that's an exceptionally pertinent question. This is something we should and need to focus on the near future. I'll just add one aspect here. The PLF has made tremendous progress out of systematically producing defense white papers, having watched the Gulf War very, very, very closely. And they have achieved each of their benchmarks. Why has PLAF been the focus area? It's simply because the plan, the Chinese Navy actually dominated the spaces in the first island chain around Taiwan and in the South China Sea. And that is where it also factored in its anti-area access denial strategy. But the US carrier battle groups, which actually dominated those spaces in the past, the whole aim of the plan was to push them out of the first island chain. But they couldn't do it because of the immense air power which the carrier battle groups brought to the table. But this is where the PLAF came into being, and it's developed its capabilities in an enormous manner. It is, just for an example, I'll just quote it here. It slapped on air-launched cruise missile on its dated H-6 bomber, flew it all the way to Guam, and forced the Americans to move out their bombers from Guam to the mainland. So that is the kind of role the PLF has played in the vertical aerial domain over the maritime domain. So look at the synergy of dominating the maritime spaces with the aerial spaces. So PLAF has taken a leap in that. And they have also done enormous advances in hypersonics and all other aspects of aviation and the armament industry. But what I must bring out and leave it at that is that this capability which it has over its, what should I say, along its eastern shoreboard is not necessarily as yet replicated in the Tibetan region. So at the TAR, that is Tibetan Autonomous Region, the air defense is still a little nuanced. They're working hard to build up. It doesn't have adequate offensive capability from its air force. So that is why it has focused on its rocket force across in the Tibet. So we will do well to stay in, keep in mind that the rate of infrastructure development of the Chinese in Tibet is something we need to watch very carefully. and the development of his advanced platforms and weapons will make a difference, taking away, neutralizing the little advantage the Indian Air Force has even now and in the very short term near future. But we need to think long term in terms of weapons. The Indian Air Force has a long list of requirements which I feel have been not looked at it with the seriousness it deserves. I'm sure this conflict, little small conflict, will give us the focus on it.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Before that, General Handa, any comments from you on this?
Sir, just one or two comments since I've been MGAD on the northern borders also. So 2-3 issues stand out. The density of air defense weapons, which includes their guns, shoulder-fired missiles, and even the radars, even at the tactical level, with PLA, Army as well as Air Force is definitely, I would say, they outnumber us by 3:1. And they have integrated their air defense weapon systems with each of the infantry battalions itself. So, and of course, it definitely is going to be a big challenge. And of course, we need, and over a period of time, I think during the last about 3 to 4 years, we have got about 12 to 13 AD units now all along the northern borders, whereas about 2 decades back, there were just 1 or 2 units. So while we are making progress, but the progress needs to be faster, sir. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. Admiral Nadkarni, any comments from your side?
Sir, at the moment, we do not have such weapons, but there is a plan to sort of develop these in accordance in sort of consultation with the DRDO. But I think many of these projects are actually, fallen under the classified domain. So there aren't too many details of these projects, except to say that certainly the Navy has recognized the need to have these weapons, including on our own warships, because hypersonic missiles could target, both land targets as well as ships at sea. So therefore, I think we are definitely thinking along those lines, and there will be some project in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the next question. This is from Rishi Atreya. Correction, sorry. Before that, we'll go on to the question asked by Madhavi Mistry. Question is, how feasible are ground-based R-73S converted as SAMs? I repeat it. How feasible are ground-based R-73S converted as SAMs?
I think this is something, if I may give some inputs, I think which has already been tried out by the Russians. They have an enormous history of switching systems, and with this, whether we can do it, I'm sure we can. But again, like I said, there's a limit to how much you can do in the numbers of systems that we hold, older systems which can be modified. Purchasing systems just for this, I think, will be self-defeating. It'll be better to get an integrated systems, because these are all solutions which we have to make when we do not have adequate weapon systems. But I want to make a point here and bring out the fact that while we are, patting our backs on our air defense capability, we have a long way to go. This is something I can't overstate. And I want to bring out one important fact here is how vulnerable are all platforms in hostile battle spaces, in high density hostile battle spaces, which has enemy air defense active. And that has been already brought out. It's there in the northern borders. It's there in the western borders. And there is a limit to how much you can have this counter UAS systems, because at the end of the day, if you look at the scale of length of our borders, volume of airspaces, it is impossible to cover it entirely. So we have to be sectoral and probably target specific and area specific. But do remember that these all have limits. There is a limit to air defense. Even the best of air defense systems, like it was shown in Israel, cannot prevent vectors from getting through. So this is a new age reality we will have to live with. I only say this because there is this, there's a narrative which goes around that, oh, we must focus so much on air defense and nothing can get in. That is impossible to do in a country our size. So we must remain focused on our military needs and, of course, our strategic targets to keep them safe. anything else that you coverage of citizens and deployed forces will also have a spin-off from the larger integrated air defense approach. And that is something we need to bear in mind. And we need to focus on the entire range of air defense systems and not on any just specific one.
Okay, General Handa, any comments from your side?
Not really, sir. That is the conversion of this weapon system to the SAMs. I think the technology needs to be upgraded. If you want to really convert a weapon system, particular to be made to a SAM, so it may be better to rather go in for a new weapon system.
Okay, right. Admiral Nadkarni, anything you have to add?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll go to the next question. This is from Rishi. This is for Admiral Nadkarni. Talking of missions and amphibious operations, 2611 was an amphibious terror attack. Given that it was not a combat naval ship, it may not have been the scope of the Indian Navy. Should this be the responsibility of the Indian Coast Guard or Maharashtra Police? Then he further goes on to say, regarding crude oil terminals besides Visakhapatnam and Chennai, there is scope to have more on the East Coast. So both these. I can repeat the question if you want, but basically talking about 26.
I've got the window open. So the first
Right.
question, sir, I think firstly we need to differentiate between the amphibious operations and coastal security operations. And in this Mumbai terror attack was basically an incursion by sea by a terrorist group. So therefore it comes under the domain of coastal security and not really amphibious operations. Amphibious operations would basically mean landing troops on the foreign enemy shore, which is either defended or could be in some rare cases undefended also, for which an entirely different sort of organization, platforms, etc. would be required. So in the case of 2611, after that we have totally revamped our coastal security organization and structure, in which the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marine Police, and various other authorities also play a very important part. And based on what we have learned from that particular terror attack, there have been a number of steps which have been taken by the government to sort of augment our coastal security preparedness. We have established a coastal radar chain which extends along the complete west coast and most of the east coast also, so that no unidentified vessel, whether it be a large ship or even a fishing boat, can get through and land on the coast without being identified and challenged. The Navy and Coast Guard have assets which are specifically devoted to actually guarding our coastline. There are zones which are promulgated, the Marine Police having the smallest zones which extend from our coastline. Thereafter, it is a role of the Coast Guard to protect that zone, and subsequently it is a role of the Navy. We also conduct a number of coastal security operations. Generally, two major exercises, not operations, two major exercises which are conducted each year, and they test the preparedness of all these organizations. We also have activated various groups on shore. Let's say there's a fisherman community. They are also activated so as to act as our eyes and ears. And if they find something suspicious, let's say a ship which is not belonging to their own village or carrying out some suspicious maneuvers, then they immediately get in touch with our Maritime Operations Center and our Coastal Security Operations Centers through a hotline, and they can tell us as to there is this particular vessel, and we can then send in assets to actually carry out challenge boarding or interdiction of that particular vessel. So this is basically what the organization has evolved since 2611. Amphibious operations, of course, that comes under the total different sort of scheme of things. And in that, it will be only the Indian Navy along with the Indian Army and the Air Force. We don't yet have Marines as such, but these are the organizations which will be primarily involved in a full-fledged amphibious assault on an enemy shore. And regarding these crude oil terminals, as these are the ones which I am aware of, I am not aware of any others which are likely to come up. But there are certainly ports which are there on the East Coast. Now, whether there is a need, firstly, which means that there should be a refinery close by from where this crude oil can be pumped through a pipeline and then be refined into petroleum products. So all these things have to be sort of factored in before you decide on setting up a crude oil terminal, with which means establishing a signal buoy mooring and so on, where these VLCCs can moor.
Okay, thank you. Another question by Rishi. It is for the Admiral. Given that India has vastly superior maritime power, why doesn't India take the war to the sea rather than merely respond to provocations on land and air power on the continental border? It's a loaded question, but
Yes.
Admiral Nadkarni may
Sir,
like to address it briefly.
taking the war to sea, I mean, involves bringing it into a totally different dimension, which means an all-out war. Now, as brought out by the other speakers also, both the army and the air force were also restrained and carried out targeted operations and responded to provocations from the Pakistani side. There weren't troops which crossed the borders, aircraft didn't cross the borders, and therefore the Navy also cannot take actions on its own. That means that maybe targeting, say, Pak ships or Pak trade or whatever it is, as we could do if there was a full-fledged all-out war. So this was the reason why the Navy also confined itself to the operations which it did, which is basically ensuring sea control and sort of having a full MDA over the entire Arabian Sea or the North Arabian Sea.
Okay, thank you. We go to the next question. This is by Dr. Gautam Sen, and this is for all the three panelists. Has India graduated in OP Sindoor from the strategy of offensive defense to offensive offense? Graduated from offensive defense to offensive offense in OP Sindoor. Yeah, we'll start off with Marshal Choudhury.
Thank you, General Mahajan. I think it's a very premature to come out of with this kind of statement or an outlook out of a small operation. I think what the small operation has focused on is I say again, on the lower end of the scale, it was aimed at messaging terror and messaging terror kinetically and messaging to the terror and their keepers. So it is an entirely different scale. But yes, what it certainly has brought in is a clear offensive outlook in our addressal of terror at the low end of the spectrum. That is very clear from I think the Prime Minister's statement when he said, when he said talks and terror, trade and terror. I mean, nothing can go with terror running aside. And the fact that we will respond every time there is terror and any serious acts of terror, I mean, it will be as a indication of war. I think that is an entirely different aspect, because now it just, again, like I said, it covers only one end of the spectrum. But as we have seen along the escalatory ladder, there is a lot of scope within the limits of the nuclear umbrella to bring in a larger offensive outlook into our military. We've been traditionally very reticent, and I'm afraid it has also, given our military a very traditional outlook where we are hesitant to hit and hit hard. I mean, I don't say this with any disrespect to the military, because we do that, but we are bound by larger limits from a larger holistic perspective. I think that is where an approach and mentality changes come in. It will show through in our military strategies, but it is too early to come to a conclusive statement as has been sought by the Mr. Sen.
Okay, General Handa, anything you'd like to say?
Sir, I just say just one statement. Yes, definitely offensive intent has definitely been established. Offensive offense in terms of, at changing the threshold level has also been established, maybe for the next operation. We definitely don't want it to happen, but the thresholds have been redefined.
Yeah, Admiral Nadkarni.
Yes, sir. As also I would agree with my fellow speakers, and essentially I would say that we have this time called out Pakistan's bluff, especially the nuclear bluff and the so-called red lines that there was a lot of talk of what are nuclear red lines and when will they be breached. We have conclusively proven, I think, that we can carry out such conventional operations without really triggering any of the red lines, and that is, I think, a most important takeaway. So I think this operation has taken that step a little further, and in the future, I'm sure this will have that much more deterrent value to what TAP plans, maybe in terms of a terror operation in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is.
Yeah, Air Marshal Choudhury has to say something.
Yeah, quick, just add one more point to this. I mean, absolutely valid point brought out by both those speakers. But what I think what is a really consequence, and we need to take a lot of, it gives us a scope for a lot more, is the smooth rollover from a lower end of the spectrum towards a higher end. That means a sub-conventional activity, which would have been terror specific, has now seamlessly been merged with the more lethal use of the military instrument in a very graded and escalatory manner. So this smooth synergy or blending, or should I say graying of the boundaries which we had in the past, I think that is the most important takeaway.
Now I'll just read out one comment which has come from Dr. Mrunmayee Bhushan. This is, and I'll just read it out. The kinetic achievements, including calling out the Pakistani nuclear threat and non-kinetic strategies, that is Indus Water Treaty, have been extremely successful and absolutely commendable. However, there is a deafening silence about comprehensive preparedness against the covert and overt new age biological and chemical threats to national security. The extensive CPEC collaboration in this domain, including neuro warfare, cyber biowarfare, needs to be in focus. So this we need to be kept in mind. I'll go to the next question now, which we'll keep it as the last question because we are running out of time. These are a set of questions from Colonel Gokhale. And so I'll request the panelists to answer this. One pertains to the Navy. Did Navy fire a single shot, or its presence was only in the role of blockade? Then further, he goes on to say, source codes are a matter of concern for Rafales and possibly Mirages. France has reportedly denied the same. Your comments. So first of all, Admiral Nadkarni, and then to Air Marshal Choudhury.
So with regard to the first question, I cannot really speculate on this because there's not much which is available in the open domain. And if I were to ask anyone serving, they will obviously not be willing to sort of give this comment. But what I would say is that the Navy had the full wherewithal to carry out offensive operations if there was a command which came from on top. So in that respect, I think Navy was fully prepared and would not have hesitated to attack whatever targets that it had decided on if we had got a go order.
Okay, Air Marshal Choudhury.
I think it's an interesting point because this becomes a clear issue and was a aspect which we sort of loomed large when we were when the F-35 was suddenly came onto our table. Yes, I frankly will not know the details of this because it is outside my retired veterans pension scope, the knowledge of this. But what is important, I think, to remember here is that in today's war fighting, where weapon systems are showcases of the military industry of a respective country, when the balloon goes up and their product is at threat or under playing an active role, I think these considerations are sort of put behind the scenes. I'm sure there would have been enough people at work on this, and I'm sure it would have factored in. One point I just want to underscore on what Air Chief Marshal Naik brought out on the numbers. The PF in the past have been always focused on the numbers of kills, and that's about all that the Air Force has contributed. But we must remember, I think, from the Indian Air Force and from the Indian military aspect, is that losses will be there in all conflicts from any of the services. This is a part and parcel of the professionalism and a part of the job description of the military, of the Indian military. And what I think we need to focus as a nation is outcomes created by employment of force, not so much as number crunching, because number crunching doesn't decide which country won. By which case, a clear example is the US and Vietnam war. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Last two questions. This question is by Nikhil Mainkar, and it's actually for all three, a very broad-based question. Cessation of hostilities at the time accepted, whether India might have delayed, can it be perceived as a missed opportunity as per perception of some in media? So whatever be your perception. Yeah, we'll start off with Marshal Choudhury, then go on to General Handa and of course Admiral Nadkarni. If you wish to answer.
I think media perception is an important aspect. We have seen how Pakistan has always caught us flat-footed in the media perception. And in the past, we learnt it the hard way in post-Balakot, the follow-up which took place, and the entire narrative was taken away from what was the strategic aim of the, I think, of the Indian state to what was actually turned against us, in fact. And very interestingly, I was told by a very veteran senior journalist who I met after this whole thing in one of the events. He said, if today's day and age, if you do not give a counter within 3 hours, you have lost the story. So that is the kind of agility, and which I think Air Marshal Nayak brought out very aptly. Like if you see, while there was a fantastic job done by these two girls and the way our media was put across in a very cohesive manner, but I think a little more specifics should have been given. We tend to hesitate to do that as a military. I think we underestimate the need of putting such a narrative across, not only as a reassurance to the nation, but also internationally. So I think also we need to bear in mind the way the Chinese media has been active behind the lines in all other domains to showcase the success of their weapon systems. And there have been a lot of the weapon industry which came into play in this media war. So it is not just the perception of the war itself, what was happening here across our borders, but on the behind the scene in the boardroom of the international military defense industry. So this is something we need to come to terms with. I think we've got a long way to go in our strategic communication as a nation.
Yeah, General Handa, would you like to say anything?
Sir, on face of it, definitely the comment by these officer who's asked this question would come to anybody's mind. But I'm sure this would have been discussed and weighed, and then the appropriate decision-keeping factors, various factors would have been taken. I would just leave it at that.
Admiral Nadkarni?
Like I think even General Handa said, this is basically a political decision, and therefore there would be certain pros and cons which would be there, both in the minds of the political leadership as well as in the minds of the military, let's say the three chiefs. And based on that, and of course, it was I think a little bit of pressure. They have also been put to sort of. Of course, this is a bit of a debatable issue whether the US sort of influenced Pakistan or India or whatever it is to come to this decision. At the end of it, I think it was a political decision was taken by our own leadership based on this initial call which was given from Pakistan. And I think we'll leave it at that, sir.
Okay, so since we have Chief Marshal Naik, sir, would you like to comment on this particular question, sir?
Can you just repeat the question?
The question was, which the panel had just answered, was cessation of hostilities at the time accepted, whether India might have delayed it, can it be perceived as a missed opportunity as per perception of some in the media?
No. I agree with both the Army and the Naval speakers. It is a political decision and it has been taken considering a host of factors which we are not privy to.
Right.
The second thing is, I wanted to just amplify the point about what Chow brought out concerning own damages, and it's likely to happen. Of course, it happens in war. The thing is, you have to have credibility. If 500 drones have come over your airfield, there will be some damage. Why are we shy of saying, the bloody hangar was damaged? It will be repaired, here it is. So that is where I felt we could have been more transparent. Thank you.
Right, sir. We'll come to the next question, which is the last question. And after that, we have Brigadier Apte who wants to say something. But before that, a question from Mr. Max Sri. Along with the robust air defense, precision LRVs have been a way proved to be decisive. However, with reference to China, our air defense may not be adequate considering the large inventory of PLA rocket force. an important lesson is that we would need longer range weapons such as ALCMs, ALBMs, and platforms to deliver the same such as strategic bombers. Your opinion on this, sir? So, Marshal Chaudhary.
Most certainly, long-range vectors we have seen in all the recent wars. The most of the targeting has been done by long-range vectors, which brings into focus most important aspect, the targeting accuracy and the weight of damage. And there are, as of now, there are limits on how much of damage and accuracy on long-range vectors, which is being worked on by every nation. And bringing in hypersonics adds to the speeds and complexity of such vectors. So what is important here is that, yes, as I mentioned earlier, the PLAR for the PLA's rocket force is a credible threat, but it is not. It has its limits. And do remember, it is to fill the gap of the PLAF's offensive capability. Once the PLAF's offensive capability improves with the standoff air-launched weapon systems and capabilities, we will be in it will be a different story. We need to develop this quickly and credibly. But what is interesting is on the issue of strategic bombers, I will put it simply, there's a divided thought. There are many schools of thought in this. Strategic bombers are most certainly a strategic capability in the maritime domain across the large maritime spaces and distances, given the relatively benign air defense environment for them to operate. Whereas in continental spaces, they will have a challenge, especially in our context when it comes to China and fighting against them, possibly in Tibet. But most importantly, the flexibility of air launch cruise and ballistic missiles has its huge advantages even now. Even we have the certain capabilities of penetrating the air defense, which will be used in an all-out conflict. Because air launch vectors have a huge advantage of flexibility, deception, and being able to be launched from expand the distances of the weapon capability. Whereas ground launch vectors are tracked from scratch, from start. So they're entirely different threat aspect. But we need to bear in mind that nothing is a solution in itself. We need to invest in the entire range of these weapon systems. And that is the most important takeaway. I wouldn't like to go into that, oh, rocket force versus this versus that, manned fighters versus drones. That's a very simplistic argument. What is important is that we need every bit of wherewithal in our inventory when the chips are really down.
Brigadier Apte has to say something. May I request Brigadier Apte to switch on his mic and also his video here? Brigadier Apte, please.
Thank you, sir. Excellent presentations. Simple question. In the wake of Sindoor, would we like to rethink our strategy for establishment of theater commands? In peacetime, agreed, there are various differences, but I have noticed in 1971 also and now, the manner in which our armed forces integrate, synergize in times of conflict or war, I think has been demonstrated and exhibited excellently. Keeping in view the future context of warfare and the manner in which this game finished within 4 to 5 days, would it be prudent to still continue with theater commands or re-strategize them into a different model? That's all.
Thank you, sir. It's a very difficult question to answer and it will take a long time. So may I leave it as a food for thought to all the panelists, and we could then interact later, because I think it will take a tremendous amount of time with possibly never finishing arguments. But my last question, yes, Marshal Gokhale.
No, I just wanted to mention one totally different point. You see, like they say, the victory has many fathers, but defeat is orphan. So you'll find there is a lot of jingoism going on at the moment, and the world is watching us with different takes that there are. So I think we need to tone down, put our head down, look at technology, look at AI, look at various vectors, and just keep on moving Atmanirbhar instead of beating our chest and saying that we really thrashed Pakistan to bits and pieces.
Yes, sir. After that, I'll ask a question from my side, which will be the last question. with so many drones, we were attacked with 400 drones. They were low-cost drones, which were not so costly, which could be employed. And as Major General Handa mentioned, that even the radars could not pick them up. We have a case where Punjab government has decided to purchase 2 systems for countering these drones. So will it happen in the future that we will have people having private air defense systems for drones? Is it a possibility? Like we have the private security now, since the police we feel is inadequate. Are we reaching that scenario where we'll have private air defense against drones? Jan Handa and of course then Marshal Choudhury, sir.
Sir, I think we have already reached that stage where there has been tremendous proliferation of drones. Now, this is where the role of Drone Federation of India comes in, which is, I think, the overarching government body, which will have to control, because there are already about 550 drone companies. And there are also the airport authorities of India have taken out these drone rules and regulations. So all those, definitely a drone ecosystem is already there. These rules and regulations will have to be put in place, and various aspects will need to be handled. But this is going to take place already. In fact, if it has not already taken place.
Yeah, Marshal Choudhury, please.
I think we had already gone down this river ever since there was, the stated drone threats well inside our civilian spaces in peacetime. And when we found drones, and there was targeting of leadership internationally by drones in peacetime. So I think we are already down this path, and it's it sets a dangerous precedence, because in this case you'll notice that the boundaries between peacetime drone requirement to meet security requirements in the CAPF domain is different from the military requirements in war. And this is a challenge, because now these two areas have become blurred. And I find that even the Drone Federation of India, which essentially looks at the peacetime requirements and the commercial applications, will have to find overlap with military applications. So this will need, I think we need to put our head down together on this whole aspect. This is just the beginning of the tip of an iceberg, which has got a lot of aspects. And I think it'll be dangerous to come to simplistic conclusions on this.
Admiral Nadkarni, anything you'd like to? So Marshal Gokhale, your mic is muted, sir. You'll have to unmute your mic.
Ministry of Civil Aviation, thank you. Ministry of Civil Aviation has formed a committee, and military people are also on board. I think somebody from the headquarters is also on board. I was told this by, the Pune Minister for Civil Aviation. And so I think some of these issues, we are talking about, integration, civil as well as the military drones, will take place in a few days' time.
Admiral Nadkarni, anything on this issue? Your mic is mute.
Essentially, I would classify the drones as 2 types. One are which are cross-border, that means they are coming from mainly Pakistan. And the second is possibly that they are being used by already terrorist groups which are already inside our territory. So in the case of the cross-border drones, I think I am at least clear that it should not go to the state government per se. It should be the job of either the Army, Air Force, or even the BSF for that matter. As far as now the other drones which are, let's say, operated by our own, terrorist groups which are operating within our country, that is something which now you'll have to see as to how to counter. And for maybe taking them down, you can have both kinetic as well as sort of non-kinetic measures. So perhaps we can consider, I mean, this is up to debate, but we can consider giving some lower formations or lower authorities also the ability to have non-kinetic measures, maybe to disrupt communication so that they can be sort of taken away from their controller.
Thank you, Admiral Nadkarni. And we come to the last event, that is a vote of thanks. So we are already overshot by 30 minutes, so I'll keep it very, very brief. First of all, I must thank Air Marshal Gokhale, who was kept awake through the night, and he's joining us from the United States of America. So thank you, sir. and all the three panelists, Air Marshal Choudhury, General Handa, and Admiral Nadkarni, for having brought out the very salient aspects of OP Sindoor, since we had so much of knowledge available in the open domain. But what was needed was actually the precise information which needs to be given to military leaders and also to civilians to know as to exactly what was happening. So thank you all very much. And with this, we finish call of this webinar. Thank you all for joining in a great number. We had 77 people at the peak hour, and now it has gradually declined, but still